Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jane Fillion. I'm the press secretary here at First 5 Years Fund. Thank you so much for joining us today. I just wanted to step in before we all get started, give you a quick rundown on what today is going to look like. So First 5 Years Fund Executive Director Sarah Rittling will be leading today's discussion with Congresswomen Bonamici and Hinson. We'll start with discussion, and then for the final few minutes, we'll open up the floor for questions in the Q&A feature and some which you've already submitted. Thanks again. Sarah, take it from here.
Thank you, Jane. I am Sarah Rittling, Executive Director of the First 5 Years Fund, a bipartisan advocacy organization working to sustain and expand support for childcare and early learning here at the federal level. Our guests today are two incredible congressional champions for America's littlest learners and their families. They're also very busy, so we're very fortunate to have them here to discuss an issue I know they hold near and dear to their heart, childcare. We're joined by Congresswoman Ashley Hinson of Iowa, who in just her second term in Congress has already established herself as an early learning champion, tirelessly visiting childcare centers across her district and introducing meaningful legislation to help children and families. And Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici of Oregon, who has spent her career advocating for and securing investments in key early learning programs, including sponsoring bills and leading letters for appropriations. As the ranking member of the subcommittee on early childhood, elementary, and secondary education, she is one of Congress's top experts. Today, however, they are here as the new co-chairs of the Congressional Bipartisan Pre-K and Childcare Caucus, which they lead with Congressman Castro of Texas and Congressman Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. Congresswoman, welcome. Thank you for spending some of your day with us.
Great to be with you.
Right. Now, I know you were both very busy over the summer, which feels like an eternity ago now, and then certainly over all of your recesses where you prioritize doing visits to early learning centers in your districts. Can you share with us a little bit about that, why it's so important for you to make that a priority when you're home, and what you're hearing, seeing, and feeling when you're visiting with your constituents? Congresswoman Hinson, why don't you go first?
Sure. Well, thank you, everybody, for jumping on. And thank you, Representative Bonamici, and to our other co-chairs of the caucus. Obviously, this is an important issue for us to be highlighting. And I have about almost a quarter of the state of Iowa. I have 22 counties in Northeast Iowa that I represent, and a lot of them are rural counties. And so I think it is very important when we think about workforce, which is one of the top issues that I continue to hear about as I'm traveling my district. You have to figure out how to support the workforce behind the workforce, and that's our childcare system and childcare workers. Truly a labor of love for so many people, and all the folks that I meet in the industry are, number one, they're so compassionate, they're selfless, they are taking their time to care for others' children and help raise them. That's really what I've been through this. My boys are now 10 and 12, and I make it a point to hear directly from the providers about the challenges that they're facing. So just a couple of the things that really came up. Number one, it's about high quality childcare, making sure you have dedicated teams and dedicated staff. One of my recent visits was to a childcare center, the Romper Room in Dubuque, but they have a second location. It's called Romper Stompers, and that is for childcare specifically for those who don't work 9-to-5 jobs. So continuing to hear about how we can support the workforce and accommodate non-traditional work arrangements is a huge part of what I have been recently hearing in my district. And I'll turn it over to Representative Bonamici for her feedback.
Well, thank you, Representative Hinson, and thank you to the First 5 Years for hosting this. I'm grateful for the conversation. Summer wasn't that long ago, and I did spend some time speaking with people in the district I represent, which is the northwest part of the state of Oregon. And even though my kids are grown, I've had this conversation and made this a priority for many, many reasons, including the fact that when we invest in young children, it's good for the children, it's good for the families, it's good for the economy to get kids off on the right start and a good start in life. So I have a childcare advisory board, which I started pre-pandemic. That was a long time ago, but from my childcare advisory board, I get the voices of providers, of experts, of people who are providing childcare day in and day out, and also of people who have worked on the policy behind childcare, because it's so important to make it available and accessible. And we have 36 counties in Oregon, and every county has some bit of a childcare desert. That changed somewhat with the funding that came from the American Rescue Plan, but we know there's still incredible challenges coming up as that funding has expired on September 30th. But we know this is important to continue funding and making sure that people can afford childcare, but also making sure that people doing this work, as Representative Hinson said, people who really care about our children are paid a salary that keeps them in the job, because unfortunately they've been underpaid and can go somewhere else to make more money. Many times they can't even afford childcare for their own kids. So it's great to be able to get out there to talk to people. I want to highlight a visit to Neighborhood House in Multnomah County, Oregon, which I visited with Senator Wyden to talk about the importance of connecting childcare with affordable housing. Neighborhood House has affordable housing with childcare on site. And we heard from a mom and about what a difference it makes in their life. She doesn't have to pack up her kids, get them on transit or in a car or on a bus or on a bike to a distant location before she can go to work, because the childcare is co-located with the affordable housing. So I have a Build Housing with Care Act to address that. As we have a affordable housing shortage. As we're building affordable housing, if we build childcare into the housing, it's great for families, and it also is a stress reliever for those working families. So those were some of the visits I had, meeting with my advisory board, even talking with friends who, some of my friends have grandkids. They were talking about how it is so expensive for their grandkids to be in childcare. One friend has twins. And it was staggering how much they pay for the two infants to be in childcare, seriously more than their housing. So we have some challenges to do, but I'm grateful that we have the Bipartisan Caucus working together on this key issue.
Yes, exactly. And I think, obviously we see a lot in the news about partisanship, but this has really truly been an issue that has been wildly bipartisan before the pandemic, during the pandemic. Obviously, now as we sit here today, having this conversation, and the caucus alone right now has probably, at last we checked, was almost 60 members in the caucus. In just this not even first year of the Congress, there's roughly 30 bipartisan bills introduced that touch childcare or early learning alone. We've seen lots of engagement at the funding level across both sides of the aisle, and you two have teamed up on the bill, I believe, that you mentioned, Congressman Hinson. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that legislation?
Sure. Well, that specifically came out of, you talk about during the pandemic, we heard a lot from healthcare providers, from law enforcement, people who are not working traditional 9-to-5 jobs. When I started my professional career, I was a morning news anchor, for example. So my shift was 3 a.m. to noon. Pretty hard to find childcare in the middle of the night, literally. But this is definitely what we were hearing was, hey, not everybody works that traditional schedule, and we do need to find options because we want to engage with those working families so they can stay in the workforce. So really, this is about flexibility. It's about making sure that we're incentivizing businesses to offer childcare. If they, for instance, have a shift that they need to incentivize people to come work, this would provide them the flexibility to do that. So really all it does, and I can let Suzanne talk a little bit more about it too, but really it opens up existing grant dollars for additional purposes so that they could use it for non-traditional work hours to offer childcare. She talked about how challenging it was for that family, right? That is right there, but she needs to be able to go to work. What if her schedule's weird? We have that happen a lot of times, and we certainly don't want childcare to be the barrier to someone taking a job that may not offer that same flexibility. So Suzanne, I don't know if you have anything else.
Thank you, Ashley. This is something that I've spoken about for quite some time with my advisory board, and when I'm speaking with people in the field. People do work non-traditional hours, and when we look at making childcare available, it's not a one-size-fits-all model. Some people prefer a big center, some people want home care, some people want culturally responsive or culturally appropriate care for their kids. We have to look at all of the models to see what works best for the family. And as Ashley was saying, people don't work those 9 to 5 hours, they're really struggling. It's already hard, even for people who work traditional hours. It's even more challenging. So the After Hours Child Care Act does, as Representative Hinson said, set aside some of the funding from the Child Care Development Block Grant Program for after hours childcare needs. It's going to make a big difference. We still have more work to do, but this piece of bipartisan legislation is one step in meeting the needs of families.
It is a really interesting thing, and we've obviously seen it at the challenges that families face, the lack of options that are available that work for them, and it is such a unique. There are unique challenges and unique solutions. As co-chairs of the caucus, what are you hoping you can do with this platform that you have? Certainly growing more or adding additional members to the caucus and raising awareness, but anything else? And Congresswoman Bonamici, why don't you take that first?
Sure. Yes, I mentioned, yes, I'm grateful for the after hours childcare bill, but there's a lot more work we can do. One of the things I want to mention that gives me hope is that this is, childcare has long been a bipartisan issue, but it's also coming up in more meetings and conversations, particularly with the business community. We have a manufacturing center in the district I'm honored to represent. It's in a fairly rural county, and it's a wonderful advanced and additive manufacturing center. And I was up there recently speaking with people around the table about the challenges, and they said, we need childcare, because for people to come to work, they need to have that assurance that they have a safe place for their child. So it used to come up when I'm talking to families. Now it comes up in business conversations as well. So I know that broadening the conversation is going to help. We need to invest in solutions that help families afford the care that they need. But again, we also need to build the workforce. We need to understand that people in early childhood education, many of them at some of the centers, they require a college degree. They might have student debt. It doesn't pencil out if they're not making enough to meet their own living expenses. And that's why the federal investment from grants and as I mentioned from the American Rescue Plan helps sustain the system, because we can't just raise the tuition so we can pay the providers what they deserve. We need to have that investment. So I'm hopeful that we can continue the conversation. And when I talk about it as an investment, it's a good investment for people who like to look at return on investment. Economists and experts say for every dollar we spend on early childhood education, that's about $7 we save later. When we get kids off to a good, strong start in life, we spend less in other areas. So again, it's a great investment. It's great that it's bipartisan, that we are talking about this. And it's really important, as I mentioned, not just to kids and not just to families. And it doesn't just primarily affects moms, but it affects the whole family. If the mom can't go to work, if the mom is stressed, or if mom has to stay home, it affects the whole family, but also the caregiving workforce is primarily women, nationally women of color. They're doing this really important work, and they deserve to be paid what they are worth, taking care of our nation's kids.
I would just expand on that a little bit. Obviously, I agree with everything you said, Suzanne. And I think, when I found out I was pregnant with my second baby, one of the first calls that I made was to my child care center to make sure that they had a spot. I actually started off with one in one center and one in another. And that's not an uncommon story, as I'm certainly out there talking to moms in my community. And you're right, it is a small business issue. Childcare is not only a business retention and employee retention barrier, but it is an economic issue. So I think taking a look at whether it's a rural or urban setting, making sure that people do have access to quality care options, and working with our state and local partners to make that happen. That means focusing on flexibility and affordability without compromising safety. I think that's the bottom line of every policy we want to put forth. We want to make sure the workforce is safe, and we also want to make sure our children are safe. But there have been a lot of really innovative things happening across the country in childcare. And so I think we need to take a look at the regulatory environment around childcare, making sure the regulations that are in place, as we know, every regulation does have a cost with it. Let's make sure those are actually about safety. Let's take a look at what states are doing. If they're doing something innovative or they've tried something good, maybe there's a solution for us too to take a look at. And so I think that's where this bipartisan caucus and growing that and having additional voices from across the country about what's working is a great opportunity for us to continue to expand this conversation.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Representative Hinson, because one of the issues I've been working on for several years is streamlining the child and adult care food program that provides meals for low-income students and children in care. We could get rid of that duplicative paperwork, streamline
they got
that
a lot of
program.
forms, don't they?
Streamline that program, get kids an extra meal or snack so they're not hungry, and that'd be a win-win. So I've been working on that on a bipartisan basis for years. So hopefully we can get that over the finish line.
Before we lose you, I want to make sure that we're taking any questions that might have come in while we were hearing from you. Jane, do we have any?
We do indeed. So we had a few people send questions in with their RSVPs, and then others are invited to submit them through the chat now or through the Q&A feature as well. So I will start with one that came through the RSVP lines, and it's what can constituents and parents do to help make sure that this remains a priority for members of Congress and for your colleagues as you're out there, advocating for this?
Call your member, make sure they know it's a prayer. I think
Absolutely.
We certainly hear it all the time. Every as Rep. Bonamici was saying, she's hearing it from employers. I certainly hear it from employers. It's housing and it's childcare, and those are both workforce issues. So I would say if you're watching, no matter where you're from in the country, contact your representative and let them know it's important to you.
Right. Call, email, and let people know this is a priority. If we don't hear from you, we don't have your voice. So make your voice heard.
And then we had another person ask, what is something that most people get wrong when they think about childcare in this country?
Well, my first instinct is to think back to some of the conversations about, childcare is a place to park your child. I look at it as early childhood education. We want, quality childcare where kids learn how to thrive. So I look at, I don't just look at it as here's a place where you can leave your child so you can go to work. This is a place where your child will be nourished and thrive and learn social skills and all the things that get kids off on a good start in life. So we need to look at childcare providers as professionals.
I would echo that. Many of the folks working in my kids' daycare center, for example, had degrees from Kirkwood, a local community college. They had gone for early childhood education and they really cared. And they don't call themselves childcare providers. They call themselves teachers for a reason. And I think that's certainly a misconception about folks who are there. It's not really that much different than a school. Maybe the level of care, is a lot bigger when there are diapers and bottles involved than when you're in kindergarten. And the biggest challenge is keeping focus and tying shoes. But I think that, there certainly is a stress on these folks. As you mentioned, many of them are experiencing challenging issues in their own lives as well, and yet they still continue to show up and they are educators through and through.
Great, thank you guys. So I'm going to go to one in the chat, which is, what do you see as one of the biggest hurdles to fixing childcare in this country, and how in Congress are you approaching that? I know you've talked about that a little bit, but just wanted to throw that over to you.
You want to start, Ashley?
I just say consensus building, right? It's hard to get consensus around a majority of people because there are so many different priorities. And I think the biggest challenge, and this is why I think the caucus is really important, because we can, as a caucus, kind of unite behind specific legislation, which almost really can serve as kind of an endorsement to the rest of our colleagues, having that laser focus on what policies are going to be the right ones and have bipartisan support, right? So that's a lot easier of a hurdle to get across the finish line when you have co-sponsors on both sides of the aisle than a truly partisan bill that maybe is not really going to have the legs to go someplace. So I would say that's probably, it's a challenge to get to 218 votes, let alone 435.
And I also think just emphasizing that, care work is what makes other work possible. And we need to really build on that message that, our childcare crisis or these childcare deserts can stem from the fact that this has been historically underfunded and overlooked as a sort of essential economic infrastructure. But with more parents in the workforce and more need for care, it is an investment that is worthy. And convincing people that's why we're here. That's why we're at a bipartisan caucus, to say our kids are a good investment. Investing in early childhood education, making sure that parents can get to work without the stress of not knowing where their child will be that day, is really important for our not, as I mentioned, not only for the kids and the families, but also for our economy. It's an economic issue. Childcare is infrastructure that really makes the other work possible.
That's great. Thank you both so much. And I think that's all we have time for today. So Sarah, I'll turn it back over to you.
Oh, yes. And I know we're gonna lose you to other important issues of the day, but I would say that what brings us hope and me hope is knowing that both of you are leading an effort like this. And before we go, I'll turn it over to you to give to each of you say what you're kind of hopeful about. And on a positive note.
Okay. Suzanne, I'll let you start.
Great. Well, I'm hopeful that, from my meetings with people in Oregon, but also, the conversations that we've had here on Capitol Hill, it really gives me hope that more and more people understand that providing quality childcare that families can rely on is a good thing. And just, I think about all the childcare workers and providers out there. They really pour their heart and their soul into the work that they're doing, and they're really they're helping to build a better future for kids and families and for the economy. So it gives me hope that here we are in an otherwise very challenging time in Congress, having a bipartisan conversation about the people who are going to be the next leaders. Those are our kids of today.
And I would just close by saying I'm lucky that I have so many great colleagues and so many great organizations like First 5 Years Fund that share our passion, certainly, for helping the youngest Americans. And I'm hopeful that we can continue this good work across the aisle. We have so many good efforts to expand that access to affordable childcare and also really work together to make a difference for American families. And I think we're seeing that by the policies we're talking about today. And I think there certainly is more to come in that space. And certainly as Suzanne said, a very challenging time for us here in Congress right now. That certainly gives me something to look forward to.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for spending time with us today, and keep it up.
Thank you so much.
Sarah.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.